Welcome to my talk, QGIS for GIS professionals. My name is Carsten Fennemann and I have been using open source tools such as QGIS, Map Server, OpenLayers, PostGIS and others, mainly WebGIS tools initially and later more and more also QGIS for desktop projects. And I wanted to introduce the slick capabilities and comprehensive functionality that QGIS offers. So let's dive into showing some examples about QGIS, and with this I hope you have fun and I will dive into the online screen presentation. So the goal for this talk is to provide a practical overview of the features and functionality of QGIS. We will go over a lot of things in a short time, and it will go from the user interface, adding data, looking at vector data, raster data, classifying data in categories, symbology, scale dependencies, have a look at layouts, how to connect to databases, how to use some automation, have a very brief look at the processing tools, and have a look at plugins, how to use export to web capabilities, how to use QGIS Server as a web publishing platform, and among other things. So it will be very brief, and as an overview, hopefully, this helps to have this video that you can come back to. So another thing I wanted to introduce is a little bit about this project history. So this project was started by a GIS professional and programmer named Gary Sherman. He's from Alaska and still residing there. So in 2002, he started developing this as a C++ project, and it was not built from scratch. It is based on other libraries such as OGR and GDAL. And GDAL is also one of the libraries that even ArcGIS Desktop is based on. So, and to another dependency is that it's depending on another application called Qt. This enables to create graphical user interfaces, windows, in a similar way if you know like .NET or Visual Basic, that you can create your own user interface. And the advantage of this is that Qt has bindings to Python. And then inside the core of QGIS, Gary Sherman and then the growing team of others who were joining him over the years have added Python bindings to the core so that you can use the Python language or Python scripting to interact with most of like 80 to 90% of the available functionality. So it made that very much easier for non-programmers or people like me that can write scripts but maybe are not a C or C++ programmer to add to the functionality of QGIS. And many of these things are shared as extensions to the program. They are called plugins in QGIS. So that is an overview where that project comes from. I also wanted to introduce two organizations. First of all is the OGC, the organization, the Open Geospatial Consortium, that defines standards in the GIS world, such as WMS, Web Map Service, WFS, or also data standards like GeoJSON or standards for the new Geo package and things like that. And you'll find representatives of the proprietary software vendors such as Autodesk, Small World, or Esri in there, as well as representatives of the Open Geo, OSGeo, the organization that represents the Open Source Geospatial Software Foundation. That is the second organization that you see down below here. It's called OSGeo. It's a non-profit organization based in Canada, and it does support the development and advancement of geospatial software in the open source world. So if you go to osgeo.org, you will find a list of projects. OSGeo is an organization, as I said, a nonprofit that tries to help and support the development of open source geospatial software. So they provide a platform for users, for programmers to come together. And one of the things they have done in standardization or helping find projects that are really stable, they will give a stamp of approval kind of for projects that apply to become an open source or an OSGeo project. And if you go to that tab, your projects, you will find on the desktop application, for example, that GIS and QGIS as also GVSig or the Marble, kind of a Google Earth-like application, are all official OSGeo projects. If you find them here, you can be very confident that's a stable project that will not go away and that will last for many years. And in order to become an OSGeo project, these projects are thoroughly tested if they have a valid or a viable environment, such as enough programmers, documented code, source repository, documentation, email lists for users, email lists for developers, and such. And in the Puget Sound or Seattle area, you find QGIS, which is a chapter of OSGeo, another nonprofit organization, and it has a monthly meeting. It has existed for more than 12 years, I think. Now it even predates the OSGeo organization and later became an official chapter. And there's hundreds of those around the globe. And they provide monthly meetings. They host workshops. They host get-togethers, mini conferences. There used to be the QGIS Spring Fling or Fall Fling over the last years, where you have a free conference hosted at UW, for example, where people present, their projects or geospatial projects that everybody can learn from. There's also user groups, and you could found your own one if there's none. But for example, there is the user group of geospatial open source. That was QGIS, sorry. But I wanted to mention there's the Puget Sound QGIS user group. So you find that on Meetup. There's also a monthly meetup in the Seattle area. And that has been founded after I was teaching a QGIS class for GIS professionals like 5 years ago. And somebody in the class, started a QGIS user group in Seattle. So if you open the QGIS project web page, you'll find information about how to install this project. And there is basically two ways to go about it. So let's look at my slides here. There is basically the OSGeo for OSGeo for Windows installer if you're on a Windows machine. Just want to mention that QGIS is also available for all other flavors of many different operating systems, such as many Linux flavors, Mac operating system, Solaris, basically you name it, you are covered if you want to install it. So the OSGeo for OO is just the name of this OSGeo Foundation, and they created an installer that you can download at the web page. And you're running a small application that you initially download. You can then select what detailed applications you want to include apart from QGIS. So you could install other GIS systems such as GRASS and Saga. And in order doing this, the advantage is that you have more flexibility in using geoprocessing tools inside QGIS. You can use these applications that you installed, single. You can use Saga, you can open GrassGIS, which is not part of the talk here. However, it also provides capabilities, geoprocessing tools that you can access from within QGIS. So you can use other GIS systems, geoprocessing tools, and that's why QGIS is so flexible and has so many geoprocessing tools. It's easy if you install some of these, those are called providers, that you have more than 1,000 geoprocessing tools. And the installation, you can look at doing this, using the OSGeo for W installer. It's also possible if you later in time, start up that small OSGeo for W installer and update your installation, or let the old things install, but in addition install new things, because there is a new version of QGIS coming out every 6 months. That is not necessary that you install it. However, there's new features coming up. And this is versus the standalone version. So if we go back to the website, I will just briefly show you what this is about. There is a couple of things you see here. You can install a version, the newest one is 3.14. And the interesting thing, it's a wordplay, it's called pi. 3.14 is also, the first three digits of the number pi. So this version has been named this way, and that is the newest stable release. There's one older one where it says LTR, and that means long-term release, something that's supported for a longer time, and you get support in patches for a longer time. So for production, that could be good. If you want the newest, shinest, and hottest, then you can use Pi version. So you can go to download. And if you see here, the first two things ask you whether you have a 64-bit or a 32-bit computers. Nowadays, almost everyone has a 64-bit machine. So you could choose, the upper one. If you downloaded that, it's a small application. Let's just do that for a second. Download that. If I go to my download folder, I can see that there was this small application, not even a megabyte was downloaded. If I double click, it would open a small interface where you set what you would want to install. And let me go for a second. If you could just go through this, doing this Express desktop install, and then it would ask you if you want to install QGIS, GIS, and then there's GDAL. GDAL is a library on which QGIS relies on. One part of the library is OGR. GDAL is also the foundation for ArcGIS raster capabilities. So it's a library that is used throughout the GIS world and one of the most important GIS tools out there. So you would need to install it. If I click on Next, it would just go about installing. Since I have installed it, I don't want to go further, but just wanted to show you. And then at any point in time, you could run that thing again. Once you have installed that, I can show you how that looks on my Windows machine. If I go here to Programs, I find the OSGeo4W menu, and I installed a lot of things. You don't need to install as many things, but you see that I have a standalone GIS, very capable, comparable probably to ArcInfo. But however, it can also do some remote sensing. Then you will find, some command line utilities, and there's multiple versions of QGIS, even version 2.18. I could deinstall that if I didn't need it anymore. And then there's multiple versions. Sometimes it's QGIS standalone. Sometimes it has with, the algorithms that are from this GIS, which I showed up here. So if I start this one, I can just use QGIS 3.10. If I use this one, it would be a different version, but it would have support for the GRASS algorithms. So that's what this is. Then there's other things. There's Qt Designer, which is, where you can design user interfaces, a little bit similar to like .NET or Visual Basic, if you have seen that. And down here is Saga GIS. It's another full-fledged GIS system, which you can run from here. There's an option to install it. If you install it, then you have more algorithms in QGIS geoprocessing tools. So just want to show you that there's these two options to install. So if you just want to check out QGIS for a little bit, maybe you're better off with just doing the standalone installation and using the standalone installer. And if you are wanting to get the full functionality, I would encourage you to use the OSGeo4W installer if you are on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, there is no OSGeo4W, obviously, because it's set for Windows. However, you'll find, for other operating systems, you find your downloads here. You found the Mac installers, you find the Linux installers, BSD. Not many people use that, but you also find installation instructions for that one. So that is what I wanted to wrap up before we dove into the interface, but basically it's important to know how to get the software. So let's look at what my slides show me next. I wanted to talk about the map document. So in an ArcGIS, you have an .mxd file or .mxt file for a template. In an ArcView, you had a project file that was called APR file, which was a text file. MXD, I think, is a binary file. So the QGIS file is the version of the map document that was existing in QGIS versions 2.x, you might say. So with version 3 coming out a couple of years ago, as I said, we are now in 3.14 as the newest and greatest. They have a QGIS file. It's just basically same thing as above, which is a text file. However, it's zipped, and inside is an XML human readable text document, but now the zipped one is the default. If you save it, you can also save it out as a QGIS file. And you can still open the QGIS files with, the old ones with the new QGIS. So interesting to know is that it works the same way as an ArcGIS. So it only saves the cartography, the settings of the project, the projection, and everything you do in there, but it doesn't save the data with the project. So if you want to share that project, you also need to give that person all your data directory, and probably better, just like in ArcGIS, to save it with relative paths. I have an example here. It says a map of Seattle with some data from the city of Seattle. And you will see, things that you know already from ArcGIS. So if you look on the left-hand side, we have this panel here called the Layers panel. In ArcGIS, it would be the table of contents. And inside here, you can add layers. So this is a vector layer, and we can arrange and do the cartography from here. This is a grouped layer. You can switch on and off these layer groups. I have grouped it by subjects. The content is here roads or infrastructure. Then I have here natural features, and then I have US Census information. And you will see that, you have also things that you know from ArcGIS. If you now zoom in, for example, there is scale dependency of some of these layers. You can set that on the layer. For example, if I hover over this one with a left-hand side, left-hand mouse, or with a mouse, you can, get information about this. So this code, the ESRI code, is an ID showing what the projection is, and that's one of the differences. You need to know what projection it is initially if you set the project, but it also projects on the fly, just like in ArcGIS. So if you go to a lower right-hand corner, you see a map projection here, and if I click on that, I could change this map projection. There's multiple ways you could change that. You can get there also from the menu. If you go upper left project, you can also go to project properties. So that is the projection of the map. In this case, Washington State Plain North. You can search for projections, and if you know some projection you always work with, you can use the EPSG, the so-called European Petroleum Survey Group code. Is a projection string. There's more than 3,500 in there. So 2285 is the ID, and you wouldn't need to know many of these IDs, but common ones are good to know. 4326, for example, if I put that in, this WJ is 84 decimal degrees, or plat carré, if you will, and that would be projection for setting the map. So all the layers on the left-hand side then will be projected on the fly if the projection is known. So if I hover over one of these, for example, this one is a hillshade that you saw earlier, which is not active at this scale, but you see the name of this, and then if I go back again, you see that this is actually a TIFF file, so a GeoTIFF. So you see these buildings, for example, are not showing up. If I zoom in closer, this is the area where I'm living at. This is UW. If you're familiar with the area, this is 520 Bridge towards Redmond to the east. If I zoom in, you see that, the trees layer, the green points are switched on, and the buildings come on. And so you make your cartography scale dependent. So how can we add data to this? First of all, I wanted to say that it is very similar in a way that you can customize your user interface, just like in ArcGIS. If you click on the gray side here with the right mouse click, you get that context menu, and you can switch on and off two things. There's toolbars and there's panels. Let me switch off this table of content order called layer panel. So you see that's gone. Get it back. I switch on the layer. No, that's sorry, that was the wrong one. Layer order. I wanted to layers panel. That's here. And one other thing which is good to have is the browser panel. Basically, that is another panel that I can see here. You could place it here, but you can also put it back and put one. I could put it up here. And I could also even more interesting is that I can put it inside each other. Then I get two tabs. If you go on the lower left, I can switch to the table of content. And this Explorer style thing, it looks like Arc Catalog, if you will. So basically, you get the project home, which is, where this file, Seattle Exercises Fixed.qgz file, is saved. And then all the subfolders in that same directory. When I go here, so it's under my drive D, projects, GIS classes, 2020 QGIS workshop data, Seattle. So basically, that is the folder you see here, and all subfolders are automatically here. So if I in the subfolders have additional data, I can just navigate here, double click on block groups, and here they are. So census block groups is another shapefile, and I can switch it on and off from this thing. So basically, if I place these panels inside each other, I get a little bit more screen real estate. So that makes it fun to work with. Then just like in ArcGIS, if I right click again, there's multiple other panels. We cannot get into all of them. One is for digitizing, another is for ordering layers. The layer drawing order could be different than what is a table of content, but that's even independent in here. You can go to the processing toolbox, where is your geoprocessing tools. You'll look at that a little later. Statistics panels, and so on. So there's some of the toolbars, and let me just switch off, for example, or let me switch on a labeling toolbar, which would be this one here. And the only hiccup, which I don't really like as much, is that I don't see what the name of this toolbar is. There's no name showing up there unless I hover over here and then it says label toolbar. So I can place it back. I can also switch it out, right click, and get rid of this label toolbar. So this would be the editing toolbar. There's an editing and an advanced editing toolbar. That's digitizing toolbar. We will look at that once more a little bit later. Let me get down two of the most prominent toolbars. So the first one I put up here. Let me just put it in the middle. So you see it's called the project toolbar. Here I could open a new map document. If I want to make a new map, I could open a project, which would be the map document. I could save the project. Then we are going to layout. This would be starting a new layout for print. That would be opening an existing layout. So if I click on that, if I had provided a layout or created a layout before, I can have multiple ones, just like in ArcView 3. In one map, I can have 100 layouts if I wanted to, looking at the same data. And if I would say show, I will have the layout view here. And this is kind of similar as the layout in ArcGIS. It works a little bit differently, but you can do mainly the same things. It also includes an atlas function, so where you can iterate for over one feature. So in this case, for example, if you look at the data we have neighborhoods. The one I live in is Montlake. Here's Madison Park. Here's U District. There is Pike Market, Belltown, and we could make an atlas in this, going through this atlas. If you add some settings, which we won't be able to include in this short overview, but then you could iterate and make a map that would zoom to each neighborhood and do the same cartography to provide a map book, for example. So we can also export it as PDF, or we can print it from here, and we can add many different things. From the left-hand side here, you could add, for example, if I click on this, I could add a text box, and in this text box, I would then go here, and I can put in, I would call test, item properties. I could say GIS legend. So for example, that was just to show we already have a legend icon here that I can add many different things, pictures, tables, graphics, scale bars, north arrows, everything you're used to. So this was a short view on this layout. I can save it. Also as a template, I could have my corporate or organizational template here, this logo, disclaimer, legal things, copyright, things like that. You could put that here. So let me put this back. This is for our documents. So the next one is for adding data. So it's called Data Source Manager Toolbar. From here you can add data. There's multiple ways. I can click here, add vector data, navigate to a, let's say, for example, to a shapefile. I could say, okay, I want to use the block group shapefile, add that again, close, let's see. I have it added again just with the same cartography. So let me just get rid of those. I can hold down Shift, right click, and say remove layer. It will not be deleted on disk, just removed from a project, just like in ArcGIS, for example. So this is one way. I can also drag and drop from here. In my census data, I could go for use some data from the OpenStreetMap, if you're familiar with this. I could say, okay, I want to add the places layer here, which added a points layer. Let me take off the trees and the buildings. I see there's 1 point, yellow point. That was what I added. I can also go a different route. I could go to layer and say add layer and have the same menu here. And then the next option would be I go to my Explorer, or maybe I have here another thing. It is Total Commander. Similar to this, I can navigate to a shapefile and drag and drop it onto my map. And then in this case, I have the census tracts. So this is how to add data. Similar way, we can just drop in a GeoTIFF. And there's very many formats. So you're from Tigerline files to every obscure format you kind of would be able to name, you can use in QGIS. The standard nowadays is not shapefile anymore. And of course, it's also not Esri file geodatabase, because that's a kind of a proprietary format. But based on OpenStandard, we have something that ArcGIS also can use. It's called a geo package. So you can use it in Arc as here. So the standard format, if you create a new vector layer in here, would be geo package. So then that's short GPKG. And inside there can be many different features. There can be, just like in an Arc info coverage, before you could have different geometries. Point, line, polygon could be on different feature classes, to take the Arc terminology. So, but you can have a different layer, multiple layers in one geo package. So this is a little bit like a file geodatabase. Then another format is Spatialite, kind of similar. It's very useful if you use dynamic layers, as I might show a little bit later. And then you can also in here connect to different kinds of spatial database. PostGIS is one that is a very powerful open source tool that you can use, and you can have not only geo features saved in there, but you can also have database views. So basically kind of queries that are saved in the database as a view onto the data, and can combine data and even change data with capabilities that the database has, and then add that back to a QGIS drag and drop, basically. I'm connecting to a server, so see I have some data layers in this one. It's a remote server actually standing in Germany. Let's see. Well, it doesn't take very long. Let me just see if I can drop in this location layer. It would be an ARC PostGIS file. That might take a little bit. So if I switch off places, zoom to layer, so you can see here that I have a couple of points. Let me just zoom back into Seattle area here. This is the point that comes from that PostGIS database. If I hover over this layer again, as I did over the shapefile earlier, you see an EPSG 4326. What does that tell us? Well, it's decimal degrees. Just this ID is something I know. If you work with it more, that's one you probably will remember. And it shows that it's not a shapefile, but it's a connection to a server. It shows a URL, a port, and a table name, OS geolocation. So this is actually coming from a spatial database hosted remotely in Germany. I'm sitting here in Seattle. Let me just remove that again from here, just to show how you can add that. First of all, you would need to create a connection to such a database. So that would go add connection. So you would say local and say service with local host. That would be the server. Sorry, the service is not what I meant. Service can be empty. The host is localhost database. Let me just check. I will go to where I can look at the PostGIS database. This is the user interface, pgadmin for PostGIS. Nothing to worry about. You can look at the database. Let's look what I have. I have a database Northwest GIS. Well, that's very fitting. And if I were here, let me try to get back to my other map. So Northwest GIS. So I need a username. So this is all local database test connection. Connection was successful. And I say, okay. So in this local connection, I can see my Northwest GIS database, which is at the moment totally empty. Let's say I wanted to add data from here to my database. Let's say I wanted to have these tracks. When I hover over this is a shapefile, tracks_Seattle. I can go in my menu, and you don't know the menu much yet, but I would go to database, and there is a tool called DB Manager. And here you can import data from the map into the database. So let's do the block groups instead. So okay, the import is successful. If I now click on here, so if I go back to my browser, I can also look at this now. And if I say refresh, I see, okay, the block groups are also now in my database locally. I can drag and drop them over here. In this case, let me just switch off some of these things that you see what you're actually looking at. block groups, and that is how you add data to a database and then back into QGIS. Okay, so this was a little bit of an advanced, excursion. I just want to show you, the user interface as it goes. A little bit more prominent. You can go here to properties. In properties, you would be able to change the projection, do very many general settings. You see what file that is, the selection color, you save it in relatives path, and so on. So that would be one. Another one would be going onto a layer, right click, go to properties, and you will have a similar window where you can do many different things. You could change the cartography. For example, I could say I would want to fill the neighborhood, not with a single symbol, but have it categorized. And if I could say, if it was, that I had industrial neighborhood and residential neighborhoods in an attribute, I could categorize them as such. So basically, let's do the large neighborhoods and classify them by name, which doesn't make much sense. However, you can do that and show how you could do that. There's now one very interesting feature, that was introduced in QGIS 3. If I right-click, I can also get the styling panel, layer styling panel, which pops up here, but I will move it over here to save screen real estate again. So I am getting, that's a little bigger, a third tab here. I have browser, I have layers, I can also reorder those. Put the styling here. So I can directly, switch on and off different, values. I could, take, for example, the U district. I could, get rid of this here. But I could also, on the fly, change the cartography. I can change, for example, I'm looking at U district now, so I will make that orange, red. So it works much more like a graphics editing program in this case. So you can do without, clicking a couple of times, clicking only once, and the map reacts instantly. So this is new, the neighborhood, the layer styling panel. Let's take a look at some other things. There's very many interesting things, and I can go just into several of those. And, going over the user interface, we looked at, this would be for editing features. You have the editing toolbars, you have also an editing menu. Here you can have a view where you can zoom. For example, you have it also here in the same thing as you have in view. You have on this toolbar the map navigation. If you click on this one, it would zoom to the entire map, biggest map intent for all layers. Zoom in, zoom out, pan the map, go back to last extent, and so on. You can do also time, temporal controller. That's a little bit more advanced. So there's many ways to access this. So if you go to vector, you will find processing tools, geoprocessing tools, which are coming from QGIS. And there's a variety of those. Go for the raster ones. There's many are supported by the underlying library, which is GDAL and OGR. So you can, create aspect layers, create hill shades, sieve data, create slope, and many different things. Reproject data, georeference rasters, align rasters. It has a full-fledged raster calculator, just like in ArcGIS, where you can do very many things. Just can show briefly some of these things. We looked at the database manager already. Web is something specific, mesh as well. Then the last thing in that user interface, which I really wanted to show, is this processing toolbox. If I click on processing toolbox, I get another panel, which is this panel. I just put it back here for our screen real estate, and it gets a list of all these QGIS processing tools. We have seen that you can get to those, through the menu and the raster and vector as well. Here, if you go to cartography, you'll find things, you find tools for raster. There's so many that if you, for example, wanted to say multi-part to single part layer, you put in the search box and you find, what you're looking for. So the search box often is the best option to find something if you don't know exactly where it is, because there's just so many algorithms. And you see that there's not only the QGIS one, which has this QGIS icon, but there's ones, that they're listed under GDAL, which is, the library QGIS is based on, and ArcGIS is also based on. Then you'll find under the GRASS tools, the whole GRASS GIS is a separate standalone application. However, if it's installed, you can access that from this user interface and have very many comprehensive capabilities to that. I would say it's like working with the strengths of an ArcInfo license, because you can do all the nitty-gritty and real cleaning of data in here if something is really wrong with your topology and things like that. There's the Saga GIS tool, and you can install more than this. There's just a couple of providers that were installed because I was using the OSGeo 4W installer. So that is kind of what you can do here. When I go into more detail, I would also be able to show you that you can create models in here. There's a model builder where you can add, automated workflows and things like that. We could run some of these processing tools. There's very many things I could still show, but time is running out. I will go razzle-dazzle over, a half dozen of other things in the next 5 minutes. And you can do very advanced cartography. So this map is an example taken from Gretchen Peterson's book, QGIS Cartography. And basically it shows how you can combine, symbols or, pie charts with, a graduated color for, the population of each country and the GDP, economics output, and then show that, the size of the circle is the population, and then the color is kind of the output. The greener it is, the higher is the GDP per person. So that is one example for that. If you go to this plugins menu, I just wanted to show you quickly, if you can connect to the internet, you can see all these plugins that are in repositories that you can connect to. There is a default repository of the QGIS project, and there's already 577 extensions or plugins at your disposal. So the ones I have installed are kind of these. Some are, things you get, when you already install the core QGIS, but you could, search for certain things and find, whatever you need here. So you can directly, for example, if you were to say something from QGIS to web, there's a project where you can export a project from QGIS to a leaflet or open layers map. All the data will be converted into GeoJSON, and you can just place that on the web. So if I install this plugin while connected to the internet, I will, just wait on a minute or so until this is done, and it will show me when I'm good to go. So it's still working because I'm also recording this. So now I have this installed. If I have this installed, I could go to web and say create new web map, and then get an interface where I can create an open layers or a leaflet based JavaScript HTML page where all this data is then exported as GeoJSON. So it only works for certain data formats. Just wanted to show that that is an available potential. So I guess next thing I wanted to show something that you can have action with Python. There's very many places, and we won't get to all the Python beauty of QGIS. But if I go double click on the countries layer, I get the properties. And if I go to a tab called actions, I can add an action here. I can define one here. I double click on that, and I can have a bit of Python code be running. Just like in ArcPy, there's QPy, and you can use the API for those certain things. So there is a layer now in here. If I open the attribute layer, you'll see that we have the name of the country. And in that Python, what it will do, and there's a specific button for here. You know, if I go to that button action, I have to find this open Wikipedia page of country. And it will just go to the Wikipedia page, take the country name, and look if there's a Wikipedia page of that name. So I click on that country, and I go on my, I go click on the country, then the Algeria Wikipedia page will open. Obviously, if it's misspelled or a different language, it might not be found, but then title one for Sudan, clicking on that, just adding an action here. So there's many things you can do with this. Another last example for that is I had done a project in a region of Stuttgart, Germany, where I have a vector layer of all the aerials in that area, and there's 8,200 of those. So if I want to tile those, try to put it together, make a tiled layer, didn't work very well. So I came up with something different. Those layers are basically in different directories. So I created an action on my vector layer as a shapefile, and I go open aerial. If I click one on here, it will find my my aerial and load it just by clicking on the area. So I wanted to, I did a remote sensing project here, and often I needed to verify something using the aerial image. So it was very handy just to click on here and you load these extra geotiffs, and you don't have to put this layer together. So that is one thing. And then I wanted to show that you can use this also on the web. If we have time for that, but want to show one thing that you can have a 3D layer. This is the Olympic Peninsula. So we have a 3D viewer here that can look at Olympic National Park. And I also want to show that you can have web pages using QGIS server just look the same as if you had it in QGIS. So this is a QGIS project, and then I have a server where I install QGIS server. And if those are the same versions, I can just upload my data plus my QGZ file, and then have another component on the server. Obviously, it's a server that runs an HTTP server and then some other things, but it has QGIS server. And then it has a so-called QGIS client, and there's several of those available programmed in PHP. And if you place your project there, it kind of automatically creates a user interface according to some extra configuration, and you get all these tools. So I can, for example, identify here, it's a project showing data in it was disconnected, so I would need to connect to do that again. But just wanted to get your idea that you can get, your QGIS project onto the web very easily using a couple of means here. And there's another one where I have soils in Uganda, and with a backdrop of an OpenStreetMap. So I think I should wrap up and give some time for questions. I will invite you in the chat that you come over to go to the join.me page and that we can chat. You can also welcome to post some text questions in the chat box. I'll answer that later. I'll first focus on the live questions in our video conference. Please join me and see you soon. Thanks.